Welcome back to our final video on class objects in Python. So in our last video, we discussed the topic of inheritance. So this is a very important topic just because, again, anytime you're trying to, build any type of complex application, I would call it, or just any type of complex program, you'll learn very quickly you want a framework that allows you to reuse code. And inheritance is a mechanism that allows you to reuse code. The idea is that there is some type of natural hierarchy in objects, and that you can have a very broad category that encompasses a lot of different types of objects. So, for example, a broad category might be animals, but then there's subclasses or basically child classes that represent a more specific instance of that animal, that idea of an animal, but has some uniqueness. So we saw in our last video that would be like a fish. A fish is like an animal, and then a bear. A bear is an animal, but again, they all have kind of their uniqueness that we're trying to represent in their idea from a programming perspective. So now that we know inheritance, we're going to move on to a more complex version of inheritance called multiple inheritance. And so basically just take inheritance and enhance it a little bit. The way I like to think of it is I like to go back to the parent example, right? So I get some of my features from my dad and I get some of my features from my mom. So I'm using two templates to make me, right? So, for example, my mom's a clean freak. I'm a clean freak. So I got that from my mom. So I got that template from my mom. um, I would say with my dad, I feel like we have the same hair in the sense of like we both have very fine hair. It's almost like a dove, right? It's very soft and it's very delicate. I get that from my dad. I don't get that from my mom. So the idea with multiple inheritance is I need basically multiple templates to create the object that I'm trying to create. So I need two parents to make one child in that regard from a genetic standpoint, right? And so I like to use the example of, hey, I need my mom to get my, OCD component, and then I need my dad to get my soft, dovish hair. So we can carry that over to coding, right? So sometimes when we're trying to build a complex object, we need multiple templates. I think a perfect example is we work in it all the time, at least in a lot of my videos, we work in office applications. There's a lot of objects there that take a lot of different components to kind of describe it. Now, VBA uses a very different, I would say, framework. So they actually use a component object model, but you could still mimic the idea of inheritance there. You could say like, hey, in order to build, um, a worksheet or something like that, then I need, or workbook, I need the template of a range and a worksheet, and kind of, but maybe that's not the best example. But the idea is that you can have multiple inheritance, and usually you're trying to make a very complex object. So, really, the idea isn't that hard once you kind of understand the basic aspects. So, basically, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy these two and then modify it a little bit. Here we go. So, this will be my animal, and then I'll have a new one called animal home. So what I'm saying is that every animal has some uniqueness to it, but every animal also has a home, right? So everybody has a home. Technically, I probably should name this home, but for the time being, just to be very explicit, I'm going to call it animal home. And the idea here is I don't really care about the shared attribute, but I will say every home should have a location and an environment type. And here I'll say, here's the location and then location. Okay, and then I'll have self environment type equals the environment type. And then on top of that, uh, every animal lives on Earth for the time being. I mean, maybe we have aliens out there. I mean, we probably do, but they haven't visited us yet. But for right now, every animal home will be on Earth. Animal lives on Earth. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to take my bear object and I'm going to say, yeah, we can represent the idea of a bear using an animal, but you know what? I need more. I need more to describe the idea of a bear. So my bear will also have a home, right? So every bear should have a home. So it's also going to inherit from the animal home class object. And then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to do animal home. And it's basically the same thing. But now I have to specify some more arguments. And so here, I'm just basically adding the extra arguments that I'm expecting to be passed through. It's still going to have our is running method, but other than that, that's basically our bears. Now we're saying, hey, to represent the idea of a bear, yes, it's an animal, but it's also going to have a home, and that home is what we need to describe our bear object. So to kind of just give you more of an idea, so this is still the same. All I'm really doing is I'm just passing through 2 extra arguments now. So every time I create an instance of a bear, I need 2 extra pieces of information to define that bear. Additionally, it will now have access to more methods. So for example, it will have a is on earth method. It still has it is running and it still has is moving. So it's still inheriting from these 2 different class objects, but all we're really doing is we're just enhancing it. Additionally, it will have some attributes that we can now also inherit from that animal home class object. So now we can see our bear lives in California and it also lives in a forest environment. Additionally, we can now see the animal lives on Earth. So really the idea you want to take away from this is in order to reduce redundancy, but still maintain the flexibility to represent complex systems, we need some type of framework that allows for us to basically use multiple templates to create the idea of our object. Multiple inheritance is basically filling in that gap. It's allowing us to inherit from multiple templates using multiple templates to build this more complex idea of an object. So once you kind of understand that topic, I think it's a little bit easier to kind of comprehend what's going on behind the scenes. But it's again, it's just really it's just expanding on the idea of inheritance, and it's just saying, hey, instead of being able to inherit from one object, you can inherit from multiple objects. So now you can reuse even more code. So now you're not restricted to say like, well, I still have to have like my one master class that does everything. No, you can have your separate objects and it's just going to inherit multiple times. So with that being said though, that actually finishes our topic on classes. So there's more to it, but I think for the most part, it's there. I think for what you need, this is probably more than enough. I mean, I have notes in here about other topics. So, I have things like, if you want to check an instance type, then we'll just use the built-in function is instance and is subclass. So this way, basically is subclass is just trying to say, hey, is this a child of a particular class object? And then does this particular class object represent an instance of that object? So basically, there's some more to it. I mean, classes, especially in Python, there's a lot to it, but I would say in most cases, for what you need, this should be fine for right now. And then in those situations where we have to use those more, I would say, unique ideas, then we'll kind of talk to it when it arrives. Because I think having those examples really kind of does a good job of understanding, well, hey, why do we have to do that? So at this point, if you do have any questions, by all means, put them down below and I will do my best to get back to them. Otherwise, we will see you in the next video.